welcome. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So we are continuing where we left off last year. We are on to, of course, a new Parsha, the Parsha of Khukat. And the Parsha of Khukat starts off with a discussion of the ashes of the Red Heifer. And essentially, it also has to do with where you use these ashes, and they have to do with something called tumat mate. Tumat mate has to do with the impurity through contact with the dead, with a corpse. And it's a very, very high level. In fact, it's the very highest level of impurity that one can contract. And as a matter of fact, so to such a degree that even if you're under the same canopy as a corpse, so if you're in the same building as a corpse, as a body, you contract a level of impurity. Not that level, but nevertheless, if you actually touch the corpse, then it is of the highest level of impurity. That is the corpse itself. And it renders you, so it's called Avi Avot Hatuma. That is the highest initiating stage, principle of impurity. Excuse me. And if you touch a corpse, you yourself become impure to the level of Av Hatuma. So you realize that every time something comes in contact, then it goes to a lesser degree, but generally speaking, by one level. The laws are very complicated because if there are any one of 5 types of liquids that are there at that point, there are some rabbinic levels of impurity as well as biblical levels of impurity. It's not a subject we're going to go into heavily, but maybe someday we will talk about it in greater detail. In the meantime, let me go to the screen share. Let's see what I can find. There it is. Okay. There we are. So let me do this and this. And let me enlarge this. Let's see if I can get this larger. Sorry. Ooh, ouch. I wasn't trying to do that, believe it or not. Okay. Sometimes things happen and you don't even realize it. Okay, let's see what's going on there. Okay. There we are. Let's go to there, single page. And let me see if I can increase the size here. There we are. This looks about as big as I can make it. So even though we're actually at chapter 20 here, and we're onto a whole new subject, in fact, we get into narrative. This area here, the previous paragraph 19, was dealing with halachot, with Jewish law. This, of course, continues with a narrative, and it has to do with the death of Miriam. However, Rashi does something that is unusual, and that is he goes back and goes over all the verses. This verse, bet, this is a bet, verse 2 is actually referring back to verse 2 in chapter 19. So he introduces this by saying, Umidrash agada. He says, and understanding this from a midrashic point of view, he'etakti, I copied it, miyisodo shel Rabbi Moshe the Darshan vezehu. He says, I copied it from the works of Moshe, this commentator, Moshe the Darshan. Yisodeh is the principles of Rabbi Moshe the Darshan, the sermonizer, you might say, vezehu, and this is it. Okay. So I'm going to go back then briefly to where we started, and I believe this is it. Let's go back there. Oops. Okay, I'm sorry about the page, but what we can do is fine. I can actually make a change on that. Let's see if we let's go back one a little bit. See if I can go back one. I may have to do this differently. There we are. That's what I want. Looks like I'm missing a page here. But regardless, it's okay. So the opening words basically are, and Hashem spoke to Moses saying, Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, Vayikhu elecha para aduma tamima, and they shall take to you, they should bring to you a red heifer, right? Para is a cow, right? Aduma, tamima, pure, asher ein bamum, which has no defect to it, asher lo ala aleha ol, upon which a yoke has never been placed upon. Excuse my ending a sentence with a preposition. So now I'm going to go back to the Rashi. So Rashi starts with that. Let's see if that I think is verse 2, as you'll see from this. And maybe I have to change this again. All right, see. So sorry. All right, let's just go here and get back to hopefully this will bring us to the Rashi. Yes, there we are. We're here. Vayikhu elecha. So you see, I went back to that verse just to be able to reference this, because all this area here, up to here, is Rashi quoting from the principles of Rabbi Moshe the Darshan. So you'll see that he's going to give the symbolism and I found this particularly beautiful in terms of a commentary.
So
yeah.
This is the second Rashi on this verse.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We dealt with the first Rashi where he goes over basically the laws, the principles, basic principles regarding the laws. But here he's going to give us a literary interpretation. So he's quoting, Vayikhu elecha, they shall bring to you, they should take to you, literally, mishalahim. So the fact that it says Vayikhu, they should take, mishalahim, it has to belong to them. That is, the Israelites have to bring something that belongs to the Israelites. And why? And that's what's so beautiful and profound about what we're about to do. Keshem shehem pirku nizmei hazahav. So he's connecting this amazingly to the act of the golden calf, and basically explaining in detail how the details of this halakha refer back to an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. So just as they removed their jewelry, right, their gold jewelry, la'egel, to construct the calf, mishalahem, it belonged to them. You may recollect that, and this is worth repeating, is that they wanted their women to give the gold. Their women did not want to give up their jewelry, the gold jewelry, for making the golden calf. And so they took their own gold jewelry. The men took their own golden jewelry and constructed the calf from it. Kach yavi uze. So this they have to do. They have to bring their own jewelry. In order to create the red heifer, to purchase the red heifer, they have to use their own proceeds, their own cash to purchase the heifer. Mishalahem. It has to come from their property. Para aduma, right? A red heifer. Mashal leben, he says this is there's a parable to a son. I'm going to, sorry, excuse me one moment. Judith, you had a question.
Yeah, so the golden calf was a male and the red heifer's a female. Do you think there's a relationship?
There probably is. We won't catch it here, unfortunately. I think the reason it was a female, honestly, has to do with the idea of nurturing. I'm going on a line, Judith. It's not that I have anything to really support the theory, but my guess is that, we know, for example, in India, the cow is a sacred animal, and that's because of the awareness of, like we talk about, a land flowing with milk and honey, and the idea of providing, something like that. There's probably more to it than that, but at least on that basis, why it would be a female and not a male. And if you want to, go ahead, please.
Can you just tell me where you are? I don't see this Rashi anywhere.
It follows the very first Rashi. So it goes back. So it's after the.
Are you which verse are we looking at?
we're looking back at verse 2 of chapter 19, but it doesn't occur there. It follows the Rashi. So Rashi went all the way to verse 22 in explaining 19. And then after Rashi on verse 22, he goes back and he goes over this passage, the same passage in this midrashic way. So I hope.
So we're looking at Rashi's from verse 22.
Well, if you look after verse 22, it's verse 2. He goes back to verse 2. At least in this text, he does. I would think it would be there. I mean, this is a significant Rashi. That's why I started, because it really is. In all the years that I went over it, I never realized how significant it was. So can I continue? Is it okay for me to continue?
Yeah.
Just raise your hand, show, do participate or whatever, and raise your hand and I should be able to see it. All right, so he says, why a red heifer? Oh, by the way, Judith, this will also answer in some ways your question, by the way. He says there's a parable of a son of a handmaid who dirtied up the palace, made the palace filthy, shel melech, of a king's palace filthy. Amru, so they said, have imo, bring his mother, v'tikanech hatzoah, and let her clean up the excrement. Kach tavo para, and so you have now the calf, the heifer, the techaper al ha'egel, so that it should, in fact, cleanse, right? It should gain atonement for the golden calf. Aduma, why red? Al Shem, Aduma means red. Al Shem, this is in reference to a verse in Isaiah chapter 1, which says, Im ya'adimu katola, if they should be as red as crimson. Shahachet karui adom, that we should know that sin is also referenced as red. Tmima, pure. Al Shem Yisrael, in a sense that is a reference to Israel. Shahayut mimim, that at that point they were perfect. V'ne'esu bo ba'alei mumim, and through the act of the golden calf, they became ba'alei mumim, meaning full of impurities, defects. They now became defective. Tavo zo, so let this one come, v'techaper elahem, and let it make atonement for them, v'yachzaru l'tmutam, and let them return to their perfection. By the way, the whole point, as if you can recollect, or you can go back and check what we had recorded last year about the complexities of this particular act, which doesn't appear to have any rational basis to it. It's given as the example of a chok, which means an arbitrary rule that is given, an arbitrary mitzvah, an arbitrary divine commandment, and how complicated it becomes. These are all details now of what we read in the text. Lo Allah aleha ol. A yoke has not been placed upon it. Keshem shiparku me'alehem ol shamayim. Just as they removed from themselves the yoke of heaven, right? And you understand that the yoke of heaven is a metaphor for divine command and our willingness to accept divine command. It's a yoke. The reason for that particular metaphor is just as a yoke guides an ox, you use a yoke to guide an ox, just like you use reins to guide a horse, so the mitzvot guide us. And the reason why I think it's specifically a yoke is because an ox has a very strong neck, and you need to use the leverage of a yoke in order to turn the ox's neck so that it'll go in the right direction, in the direction you want it to go. And likewise, I think it is also talking about the essential stubbornness that we have as human beings, and you know how many times I should get a nickel for every time I say it, right? Ain't no one gonna tell me what to do. So this this goes exactly into that. And by the way, you might ask the question, well, why did God make us so stubborn? Wasn't it up to God to create human beings in the way God wished? And the answer is that even the willingness to accept the yoke of the commandments is a great act of faith. And if we did it automatically, there'd be no reason to be rewarded for it. And the idea is that we are in fact rewarded for that gift. It allows us now to give a gift. And the willingness to accept the divine commandments upon ourselves is already a huge, huge act. It's counterintuitive. But remember, I said, what's the subtext to the Torah? Doing what doesn't come naturally. Did somebody have a question?
Yes. Then why shouldn't we all be Orthodox?
Good question. That's a wonderful, wonderful question. So I like to say that the moment you start to move into this direction, you actually are Orthodox. You just aren't necessarily Orthodox in terms of a movement, okay? Orthodox with a capital O. But the truth is, if we in fact accept this idea, regardless of whether we're doing every jot and tittle of that is within the tradition, we are at least moving into that particular place. And yeah, go ahead.
So that's just why they have terms like conservadox or trad egal,
Yes.
because part of moving into orthodoxy is often a really burdensome separation of men and women's
Right.
rights.
So remember, I also said we don't just have the written Torah, we also have the oral Torah. And you have to work with what you have. And remember, the subtext of the oral Torah is circumstances alter cases. And there's a beautiful statement within the tradition that says, Echad hamarbe ve'echad hamamit, rak sheyikaveh libo lashamayim, which says it doesn't matter whether you do a lot or whether you do a little. The issue is, are you directing your heart towards heaven? So each of us have our own particular circumstance. And the fact that I'm not Orthodox, okay, although I know to some people I am, but I assure you, that's the old story about the joke about this was on that record that came out years and years ago called You Don't Have to Be Jewish, which was a series of skits. And the son comes home and he's wearing a captain's outfit and he shows his parents and he says, Mom, Dad, what do you think? And the mom is quite impressed. And the father says, listen, he says, by me, you're a captain. By your mom, you're a captain. But by a captain, you're no captain. So it depends on who you're talking to. The issue, I think, has to do, are you directing your heart towards heaven? And is heaven heaven or is heaven yourself? And the whole idea of not doing what you want to do necessarily and following your impulses is already a serious spiritual step. The degree, that depends on your circumstances. So for me personally, when I understood and began to be drawn towards the tradition, I was ready to move full step ahead. And the truth is, my family wasn't ready to do that. And I felt that being true to my family and being a loyal husband was more important than necessarily all the details of the halacha. And maybe that was a wrong decision. I felt I had some support. So for example, when a man got married the first year, basically he did not go to the army. There were other things too in order to help make his wife happy. So that was a decision I made. Otherwise, I might have been Orthodox. But I wanted to take into account the fact that I had to serve a congregation. I had to be respectful of the people I served. And it wasn't just an automatic, do this, do that. And I know there are many things that, the tradition would ask me to do that I don't. But hopefully, in trying to make the decisions as to what I do and what I don't do, I try to take into account the studying that I do, the learning that I have, and try to base my service to God on that basis, hoping all the time that this is something that God approves of. And I guess if God doesn't approve of it, I would have to say God has a strange way of showing that. I feel so blessed and fortunate, but I don't feel like I'm this big righteous person. It's an everyday, lifelong attempt. But I do realize that the significance of my life, as of any person's life, has to do with, to what do you realize that you're here to try and serve God? That's what you're here to do. And serving God is a huge, huge, huge category. It's a great generalization. You serve God in many ways, many, many ways. It was a quick question, Judith. Do you think I answered it? I don't know. Do you feel I've answered it, at least partially, perhaps?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Onwards. But thank you for asking it. It was a great question. It is a great question. It's a profound question. So the verse 3 said, El Elazar HaKohen, that what's interesting is that Moses has to tell Elazar the priest. Aaron's around, okay? But this mitzvah is given to Elazar the priest. Keshem shenik halu al Aharon, and the reason is that just as they gathered around Aaron, Shahu Kohen, that he was the minister, he was the priest, la'asut ha'egel, to create the calf, ulefi she'aharon asa et ha'egel, and because Aaron was the one who made the calf, lo ne'eset avodat zo, this particular service, that is the service of the red heifer, lo ne'esat zo al yado, this could not be performed by Aaron. She'en kategor, because a prosecuting attorney, ne'esa sanegor, cannot become a defense attorney. And since Aaron was very much involved in the whole fact that they were getting prosecuted, he was not going to be the one who was going to perform the service to defend them, so to speak. Question.
Doesn't that also say that there's forgiveness because he was not disqualified for life for that action?
I know it does. And there's deep thought involved, deep meditation involved in understanding the balance. I mean, he lost his two sons. There is, to know that our actions have profound effect is also part of a sense of significance. If, in fact, religion is all about trying to discover what is significant about our lives. And I think I realize, and it's taken me a long time to be able to formulate it in this way, that in some ways, if we're going to find joy in this life, the foundation of it is a sense of significance. And part of the reason why appreciation is so important is that when you are appreciated, when you feel appreciated, automatically you feel significant. And the reason why people chase after wealth or fame or power all has to do with this trying to discover significance. Except wealth, fame, and power are idols. They are not true sources of significance because what it does is they ignore the fact that we're mortal and we're here for such a short time. And that's why devoting ourselves in discovering and trying to figure out a path in which to serve the Almighty, to serve our Creator, is actually the best way. And of course, each religion has its own answer to that question. So, yeah.
Well, this is either an appropriate or an inappropriate segue, but the Sackler family and its responsibility with regard to Oxycontin. And it's, how did they make amends?
Yeah, good question. I would think that trying to devote themselves to the healing of these people, that if they have made a fortune doing that, that they devote much of their gain towards bringing healing and peace into the world.
And if they don't, do you not call them to the Torah?
I would not, that would depend on the community, of the community itself. I think that, once you start, this is just, a quick answer. It's not a deep answer, but I think that when you start making those kind of distinctions, where does it end? Where do you draw the line? Okay. And somehow or other, there are certain levels at which first of all, I do believe that every single one of us is accountable in the presence of the divine, in the presence of the transcendent one, in that ultimately that's what we're talking about when we talk about Eloheinu. That's what that word implies. And that whether we are conscious of it or not, or whether we want it or we don't, ultimately we are going to have to give an accounting of our lives. So the question is, what do you accomplish, right? I had a president many years ago in my congregation in Canton, Ohio, one of the best presidents I ever served under, who taught me so much. And he said, when I wanted to take a certain course, the question is, what will you accomplish? So if you don't call these people up to the Torah, are they going to suddenly do tshuva? I doubt it. On the other hand, if you try to be loving and working with people, there's a better chance that they may in fact rethink it. There's a chance. But when you punish people, you have to know what you're doing. And that's why I say it's up to the community. If that is the way the community feels, then that's the way you should handle it. Yes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we are also all the collective. So we are all responsible for each other's, transgressions and all those things. That's why we have the Ashamnu and, the different confessionals all together. Is that true? Because, we're responsible for everything, each individually and collectively.
Right. But the question is, to what degree? Okay. I can't blame, let's go to the classic one. You can blame your parents for how you are. But, at a certain point, the argument is, well, why don't you go take care of it? Okay. If you have some psychological issues with regards to your parents, there are people to go and talk to about it. Does it make it easy? No. But if you don't do anything to do anything about it. So yes, on the one hand, we are. And the truth is that for me, that's basically saying to me that the best leadership I can try to provide is to set the example that I would like to see without telling people what to do. If somebody asks me and I can give them a good answer, I would. But if I love that button that Sarah gave me, when I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. People aren't necessarily asking me for my opinion, and that's okay too. Why should they necessarily? But what you want to try to do is to try and set the best example you can, given the fact that we all stumble and we all have to try and see what we can do about when we're conscious and aware of our imperfections. And we have a lot to work. I realize that I have a lot, but that's, as I try to look back on my rabbinate and to what extent it's been of any value, that's the best I can say. It's just trying to be what you want to see happen. But we are a community and we do influence one another, but there's a degree of that influence too, right? And they're all various forces that are acting within us, whether it's TV or the culture we live in or the friends we have, or, they do have an influence, but ultimately, I'm responsible for my own tshuva. Is that fair, Lisa?
Thank you. Yeah, it's way more expansive than I was thinking. Yeah, But yes, it's just such a big discussion about what I brought up.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you for this part of it.
Sure thing. We're going to stop here. I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording.